Hello, and welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 158 for the podcast. Is cultivated meat the future of pet food? And is there a place for cultivated meat on human dinner tables? Traditional agricultural methods are slow, require large tracts of land, significant energy and environmental inputs, and, somewhat obviously, the slaughter of hundreds of millions of animals every year. Cultivated meat, that is meat that's grown in a lab, requires little land, less energy, and in the case of Meatly, nothing more than a single cell from a single chicken egg once. This week, I sat down with Owen Ensor, CEO of UK biotech startup Meatly, to talk all things cultivated meat. He explains the science behind his company's cultivated meat process, the significant cost savings that Meatly has made to bring down prices for their product, and how his company became the very first in Europe to have a cultivated meat product approved for sale in the hand of consumers and in the bellies of beloved cats and dogs. I hope you enjoy our conversation as Owen helps me unpack the science and the business of a biotech startup in an incredibly competitive market. Owen Ensor, welcome to Beyond Biotech.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Owen, I want to start by letting you share a little bit about your journey here. How did you come to become CEO of Meatly? How did you enter this biotech space?
Yes, I have an eclectic background, particularly because I have no scientific background whatsoever, which might be slightly different from many of your guests. There was a few pivotal experiences for me. I started off in consulting with Bain and Company, and then I ran an insect protein business. I took that from scratch through to industrial scale, selling them as animal feed, which was really opening my eyes to the protein crisis that we have globally, of not having enough protein, needing to look at alternative sources to feed ourselves, to feed pets, to feed other animals. After that, I did some political consulting, and then I started starting companies. So I started one in the US, backed by leading Silicon Valley VC funds. And then after that, I decided I really wanted to focus on food. I began to realize just how pivotal food was to our survival as humans, but our everyday experiences, and to the impact we're having on the environment, to the use of antibiotics. It just really impacts so much of our planet and our lives. And so that's why I started Meatly about 4 years ago. And I am lucky to have an amazing co-founder, Helder Cruz, who brings all of the scientific knowledge and wisdom, and I kind of do all the startup and all the business side of things.
It sort of sounds like some of these experiences you've had before are sort of really leading up. You haven't made a big jump from an area with nothing to do with protein and nothing to do with food suddenly into food. Has it felt like just one step after the other moving forward towards Meatly?
I mean, as a strategy consultant, I would love to say it was as thought out and methodical as that. But I mean, looking back, I am kind of pulling together all of the skills and experience I have, obviously working in a food space, working in alternative proteins, working in a very political space, kind of pulling those together. And so it does, really suit my background and my skill set. But I think there's always ways of making that happen in whatever role you're in.
And was there anything in particular that pushed you towards pet meat and food for animals?
Yeah, I mean, the big push for me was cultivated meat and just how exciting that technology is. Having worked in alternative proteins for a long time and looked at insect-based and plant-based and fermented, one of my key takeaways is that people want meat. And so this is a way we can give people meat, but in a much sustainable, kinder, and healthier way. And the reason we started with pet food specifically, 20% of meat globally is eaten by our pets and not by us. In the UK, a Labrador eats more meat than its owner. And so there's a huge need there. And it's also just easier for us to start in pet food. Pets don't care what it looks like, so we don't have to fit these very specific visual cues. And it's just kind of slightly more acceptable. People actually test more in pet food than they do in human food. And so we found great traction in the pet industry. but all of the technology, all the processes are applicable to human food as well.
Let's talk a little bit about Meatly, the company then. You've positioned yourself really as a leader in this cultivated pet food space. Can you explain what actually sets you apart from other companies in that space, whether they're biotechs, cultivated meat?
As I mentioned, I have a phenomenal co-founder, Helder Cruz, who brings a huge amount of expertise and knowledge from cellular therapy side of things, but also having worked at another cultivated meat company previously. And we have an amazing R&D team as well. And they've been able to create several kind of fundamental breakthroughs in the technology. So our process is now much cheaper than a lot of other cultivated meat companies, both on the kind of capital equipment and on operating costs. And that's allowing us now to scale in a commercially viable way. And that's a huge differentiator, kind of it's what the industry has been trying to crack for most of the last decade. And then in the last year, we've become the first company in Europe to get regulatory approval for a cultivated meat product and the first company in Europe to ever sell product. That makes us only the fourth globally, and we've raised significantly less capital and done a lot faster than those three others. So it's really the kind of pace of execution, the cost reduction we've been able to achieve that differentiates us from a lot of other players in the industry.
That sounds like the business story then, or the business case about why Meatly is such a good company. But there's the other side too. You're setting out to be sustainable. You're setting out to be ethical. Is that a trend in the cultivated meat space, or is that something that makes you a little bit different?
The kind of dream of cultivated meat has always been we can take a single sample of cells from one egg or one animal and create an infinite amount of meat forevermore, typically using 90 to 99% less land, over 90% less water, fewer CO2 emissions, no antibiotics. And so it is a much more sustainable and healthy way for us to grow meat. And we also don't need to slaughter and kill any animals. So it's always been this vision of getting meat in a real win-win situation. But the challenge has been delivering on that and bringing the cost down, which is why that's been such a singular focus for us. Kind of hypothetically, all cultivated meat companies can create meat in this more sustainable, kind, and healthy way, but it's doing that in a commercially viable way that's been the real challenge for the industry over the last 5 years or so.
When you talk about the ethics and the sustainability, is that something you use when you're trying to recruit scientists to come into the team as well? Is it something that attracts them to work for you?
It definitely is. And being very kind of mission driven is a big draw for the team members we have, as well as just working in a startup environment. So that's obviously very fast paced, it's very innovative. There's a lot of change happening, which just means their learning is really accelerated versus what you might get in academia or big pharma. And the kind of breadth of responsibilities that they have, is just far more than they would have elsewhere. And so that's definitely something that we promote and we talk about, as well as obviously all of the team have equity options in the company as well. And so we use all of those and we discuss all of those to really incentivize recruitment and retention. And we've had great retention over the last few years. And we have a phenomenal team. We're still a small team of about 11 people. Majority of those are female. Average age is about 28 or 29 from 11 different countries. So we have kind of a huge draw, but mostly kind of from the leading universities in and around London.
What about the partnerships that the companies build? Is that part of the business story as well? You've got Pets at Home, the pack. How do these integrate with your strategy? How important are they to actually moving Meatly forward?
The partners are absolutely critical, and we've been really lucky to have amazing partners on this journey. And the reason they're so critical is because they allow us to be very fast and very focused. And so we just focus on growing sales as fast as possible and as cost effectively as possible to create meat biomass. And then we sell those to our partners. So that's, as you said, the Pack, who are leading plant-based dog food brand, and Pets at Home, who's the UK's largest retailer and one of our investors. And so these partners have allowed us, yeah, just to really hone down what we're doing, be very direct in doing that, which means we can go much faster and we can really accelerate the commercialization and adoption of cultivated meat.
Yeah, you talked a minute ago about commercialization. You actually have a product out on the market. It's Chick Bites. It's Chick Bites, we call it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's on the market and it combines plant-based ingredients with your meatly chicken, which is your cultivated meat. Why are you combining the two? Why is there a need to combine a plant-based meat alternative with the cultivated meat?
So we're currently still producing in a small lab setup with limited volumes. And so the plant-based just allowed us to produce more product. But also in pet food, they're always combined products. So traditionally, meat would probably be 20 to 30% of a product. And the rest can be other fruits, vegetables, grains, pulses, organ meat, etc. And so we were following that model as well in order to give a product which was in line with the rest of the market.
Is that trying to get the nutrient profile correct for pets?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Pets and pet food is quite regulated in terms of the nutritional profile because if it's the only product a pet is eating, then it needs to be nutritionally complete. And that's the best way of formulating something that is palatable, healthy, and good for the pet is to have a mixture of ingredients. But the taste test we've done on Meatly, so I fed it to my two cats, Lamo and Zanzi, and compared that to traditional chicken and their chicken cat food that they normally have, and they preferred Meatly chicken. So I'm happy to say that the palatability, the nutritional profile of Meatly chicken is really great, and on the nutritional side, it's comparable to chicken breast.
That's something that I'm just going to chase up for a second. How exactly do you taste test something with cats and dogs? You miss that whole feedback loop that a human, even a 5-year-old human, can feed back to you a little bit about what they like and what they don't. How does that work for animals?
There's a lot of science that goes into it. So one is two-ball palatability. So you put two balls down, you see which one they go for, and so that's what I did with my cats and the meatly chicken we're trying. But you also look at stuff. We did feeding trials on dogs, and you look at, do they continue licking the bowl after they're done? How many of them do that versus their traditional feed? Do they sniff around for food afterwards? Are they looking for more because they enjoyed it so much? How quickly do they start eating? So there's all these very small signals that you can pick up on. And obviously, if you have a big enough sample, it gives you an impression. So we outperformed on their baseline diets on all of those, showing really that, again, this has very good palatability for cats and dogs.
Oh, fascinating. Tell me, let's get to the science a little bit. What is this cell culture process actually like? Can you talk me through from starting off with the egg right the way through to producing the meatly chicken?
Yeah, so at a high level, we only ever use one egg one time. So we take a single sample from that. And after that, we never use another animal product ever again. And just like making yogurt or beer, we nurture those cells in large containers that control temperature and pH, keep it sterile. And then instead of animals eating grass and digesting, metabolizing nutrients, we feed those nutrients directly to the cells. So we put in amino acids and vitamins and minerals, and the cells metabolize those and they double. And after about a week, we have delicious meat for our pets. It has a kind of chicken pate consistency, which is what pet food manufacturers want, because then they can process it into, pastes or chunks or jellies or all these different things that they make for different pets. And so all of that is done in a safe environment. There can be no contamination, but also we don't use any antibiotics, any hormones, any steroids, and we don't use any GMOs or genetically engineered organisms in that. And so it is a very safe, clean, and healthy way for us to create meat, and we can do that almost anywhere in the world, which also reduces the shipping emissions and other challenges that traditional supply chains have.
So, what are the most important factors then when you're actually developing this cultivated meat? You want to make sure there's no contamination, of course, but you also want to produce at scale. What sort of things have you got in mind in this business when you're building this meat?
For the first few years, it was all about yeah, the nutritional profile and the cost. And so we've now got very robust nutritional analysis that shows it's equivalent to chicken breast. And the cost was then the big challenge, which we've done great work to reduce significantly to the point where we can now start scaling. And that's the other side of it now. And we need to continue to manage costs as we scale. And so we're fundraising to do that at the moment. And by mid next year, we'll have a larger facility where we can start producing tens of tons a month and really testing the commercial viability and unit economics of this.
Tens of tons per month, it sounds like a lot to me, but when we're talking about a market as big as pet food, what does this actually represent? Is this something that you can scale to the level of a country or to a region?
We see it as step by step. So tens of tons, as you say, is huge in terms of cultivated meat, would be a groundbreaking milestone and almost completely insignificant in terms of pet food. And so we would need to start rolling out more of those facilities. But for now, it's about proving out a replicable, commercially viable process that then we can start building more and more of these facilities. And again, that would initially be for pet food, but then could be for human food in the future. And yeah, the aim would be once we have a profitable way of doing that to roll those out very quickly. So for now, we will always be a small part of the market, but the aim is to keep growing alongside those partners you mentioned, who are, the question we get from pet food manufacturers is just when can you get us hundreds of tons a month? When can we start really producing this at scale? And so that's our mission and our focus at the moment.
What's the challenge there? What makes it difficult? Is it just funding? Is it just getting up to speed? Or are there some logistical issues that you're going to face as well?
I mean, there are technical challenges when you go into bigger vessels, basically. So those bigger fermenters, essentially. There's things like the oxygen transfer, about managing shear stress and making sure the cells are still safe and happy in that environment, essentially. But those have been done in biopharma. They've been done by other cultivated meat companies. So it's just about the step-by-step process. Fundraising is challenging globally at the moment, particularly in food tech. And so that's taking longer than we would like. But we don't see any fundamental barriers to us doing this at scale in a commercially viable way. We just need to keep raising the money, hitting the milestones, and continuing forward. So really, it's just the timing. And I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we will have proven out the commercial viability of cultivated meat.
Looking forward, I mean, even next year, I've seen figures now that are talking about a pet food market of 120 billion pounds annually. I mean, are you really competing for a significant share of that market, or do you think you'll always be a niche player, or cultivated meat a niche player?
Yeah, I mean, pet food is a phenomenal market. I describe it as having a fanatical consumer base. Some of your listeners might be familiar, but the stats on how much people love their pets are really through the roof at the moment. And I think for us, we will start off as a small part of this market. But I think if we look at a decades long view or in the future decades, meat has a real crisis. So currently there's not enough supply because of environmental challenges, pricing challenges. Insiders talk about it as being structurally unprofitable, traditional meat. And, with the pandemics, we've seen bird flu, African swine fever, really knocking out significant percentages of the world's meat supply. There are deep concerns from pet food manufacturers about where we can get enough meat. And so that's why they're looking at these alternatives, and that's why they're excited about what we're doing at Meatly, as well as it being sustainable and kinder. It's just a secure, consistent supply chain. And I think that will mean there will be a lot of interest once we're able to prove this is profitable.
What about the criticisms, though? One of the criticisms that always comes along with lab-grown meat is it just costs a lot. It costs a lot more, and it might be better for the environment, and it might have less or fewer antibiotics. It might be fantastic in terms of not harming animals as well, but it comes at a cost. How do you address the cost concern when it comes to consumers, but also to the partners that you're dealing with?
As you say, that's always been the question for cultivated meat. And so that's something that we've been very, very focused on. So to get very specific, the nutrients we're feeding the cells in traditional biopharma can be as expensive as £500 per litre of nutrients. It's astronomical. In the last 2.5, 3 years at Meatly, with our team of 10, we've been able to reduce those from £500 down to just 22 pence per litre. So dramatic cost reduction. Similarly, on the equipment, we've just installed a 300-litre vessel in our lab. Typically, that would be about £250,000. We did it for £12,500, so 20 times cheaper. And really, I think a lot of those concerns and criticisms over cultivated meat came from historic biopharma processes. And our role as innovative, focused startups is to find a faster, cost-efficient way of doing that. And so we're really excited about the cost trajectory we see at Meatly, and obviously want to keep that going. And now it's about scaling up.
And those cost reductions are incredible to hear about. To have your feed being 2,000 times cheaper than what others were using just in the last couple of years. Is that something that's proprietary, or is that something that you're sharing with the industry to try and help it to grow and everybody to succeed?
That is proprietary for now. We are really interested in licensing that technology. There are a few other companies that are making good progress on cost as well. And I think it's about establishing those technologies, about scaling them. And then once we really prove them out, licensing them as a way of amplifying the impact that we can have.
And what about the environmental impacts? Obviously, you don't need feed yards, you don't need masses of land, as you mentioned before, but there's obviously an energy component there that is an input to be aware of. Is that a big input, or how does it compare to traditional farmed meats?
So on the environmental side, again, it'll be dramatically less. On the energy, most LCAs that have been done suggest that we use about 75% or produce 75% less CO2 emissions than traditional meat. Also, the energy we use is 100% renewable energy from a vegan energy supplier. And so we can also avert those much easier than you can with traditional meat. And the other advantage, as I said, is you can build these facilities at scale anywhere in the world. So ideally, we put these right next to large pet food manufacturers, and almost, you have a pipe straight into the pet food production rather than having to ship these components around the world. And just the meat supply chain is so complex. Typically, it's taking fish meal from Peru, it's taking soya from Brazil, it's processing those in Germany and shipping it to the US. And, all of that just produces so much unnecessary processing and CO2 emissions. And so by averting some of that kind of mass production of traditional meat, we can have a significant environmental impact.
I guess thinking long term, if we embraced cultivated meat, there's a huge environmental benefit. There'll be benefits at scale, reducing the cost like you've already done. But one of the impacts is going to be the people who traditionally generate the meat and cultivate the meat on farms. The agricultural sector is going to be impacted. We'll need fewer farmers. We'll need more scientists and more manufacturers. What do you say to people who are concerned about the impacts on farmers, the impacts on the agricultural sector, particularly when so much of that is done by people in impoverished countries or people in the developing world still?
Yeah, traditional farming, I would say, has already been disrupted by factory farming. So despite eating more meat than ever, we actually have fewer traditional farmers earning less money. And that's because they're being impacted by these huge corporations running factory farms. And so what we want to see is by embracing alternative proteins, whether that be plant-based, fermented, cultivated, we can wean ourselves off factory farms while producing less CO2, using less land and less water. Meanwhile, traditional farmers, a lot of who want to be practicing more sustainable, regenerative agriculture, they can focus on producing high quality, high welfare, regeneratively farmed products, which actually would generate them more revenue. And we can help fill the gap then that there is in supply. And again, people are already worried about not having enough meat. And so I think there's a critical role for alternative proteins and cultivated meat to play in filling that gap and doing it in a way which is sustainable, healthy, and kind.
Let's talk a little bit about regulation, because you mentioned before you're the
Mm.
first in the UK, the first in Europe to have this regulatory approval and to be out in the market as well. What took so long? Why did it take so long to get this regulatory approval? What were they worried about?
At Meatly, we've only been going 3 years, so I think most people would say that's quite quick in terms of regulatory approval. And some process can take a lot longer. I think cultivated meat is still very nascent industry. Even the first companies were started about 10 years ago. And so there was a lot of education that was needed. I think actually the first submissions were only made here in Europe about 5 years ago. And so there's just been a kind of learning process for companies and then a learning process for regulators. And what we're seeing actually is not huge concern by any government, but more that just being a process and taking time. But most governments now are embracing cultivated meat very heavily. It's in China's last 5-year plan. The UK government is backing it significantly. I think there's now over 20 governments that have funded cultivated meat company facilities, research companies. And so there's huge interest in this area from governments, but governments always tend to move at a slightly different pace from startups.
You've been granted your approval in the UK and your products are in the market there already. Where will you go to next, and will it actually involve setting up a manufacturing facility in another country if you do move outside of the UK?
For now, we'll focus on manufacturing the UK and probably export from here. But in the future, we would love to set up facilities in each country that we operate. Being focused on pet food, the big markets are obviously Europe and North America, both Canada and the US. And so those would be our natural next locations. Canada's particularly interesting. It's very alternative protein focused, has great green energy available, and we could potentially serve the US from there. And the EU, Germany, and the Netherlands are big pet food markets with, again, very positive kind of outlooks on alternative proteins. So those are the next markets that we're looking at and excited about. But also we could license our technologies to other companies around the world as a way of delivering the impact of cultivated meat.
Are there countries, you mentioned China, that has cultivated meat in their 5-year plan? Are there countries like that are more open to selling cultivated meat versus some that are maybe more traditional?
There's about 7 countries that have approved cultivated meat. So the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Austria, Hong Kong, Singapore. So those pockets are emerging, but there's lots of other companies, as I said, that have invested or supported cultivated meat, and those are around the world. Lots of European countries as well, obviously, but also places like India, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Brazil have all kind of funded or are investigating cultivated meat. And so, these nations span different regions, different political landscapes, different geographies. So there's clearly a lot of interest, both from a food security perspective, from a sustainability perspective, and from just increasing the variety of our food options. So there is, huge interest in it. And we as an industry just need to keep educating, keep discussing, and kind of promoting what we're doing in a very transparent way.
You told me a little bit before about these trials that you run with the 2 bowls and the animals tasting the food to see how they go. Obviously, pets are really enjoying the cultivated chicken. How do you get through to the owner, though, which is the person who's going to be getting the wallet out, getting the card out? Is there skepticism still there among some people around lab-grown products, and how do you address that with your marketing or your positioning?
I'm not sure if there's skepticism. There's just an unknown. I see it as kind of a void where people have heard about lab-grown meat or cultivated meat, but they don't know much about it. They don't really know how it's made, who's making it, what it looks like, why they should use it. And so really for us, it's about filling that void. And we aim to be very transparent and very open. So we've done webinars where we've shared all of the scientific testing we've done, all of the nutritional analysis we've done with vets, and that's also publicly available. We were very open with in the regulatory processes we had. We've spoken to a lot of consumers, a lot of retailers. So really for us, it's about transparency and education. I think that's how we overcome it. And typically, consumers will be like, why would I feed my pet this cultivated meat? And you explain it to them, you explain it comes from a single egg, and you explain it uses no hormones and no antibiotics, and you explain it uses less land and less water. You explain it's exactly like chicken and it looks like chicken. You hand them a product that looks like the product. And then suddenly the question is, why would I not feed my pet cultivated meat? And so really it's just that education piece that we need to keep doing and keep getting the message out there.
Does the language matter there if we're talking about cultivated meat versus lab-grown meat or alternative meats? Does the language matter getting through?
Absolutely. The language is critical, and we spend a lot of time thinking about language, talking about it. I'm very fortunate in that my partner is a journalist, and so she's been advising me a lot on kind of how we should think about communicating this. And I mentioned the process is very similar to making beer and yogurt. Which it is essentially, it's very similar. We're just using chicken cells instead of yeast or milk proteins. And so, using links like that, we all already are very familiar with beer and yogurt, and we probably drink or eat it. And so kind of hooking it to things we already know versus saying this is cell culture technology, it just makes it a lot more friendly and open and kind of approachable for people. So we think a lot about that. We talk about that a lot more as an industry. And I think some of the missteps the industry has made in the last 10 years are probably to do with language and communicating and just how we present the industry and what we're doing.
Thinking about cultivated meat moving forward, in the pet food industry, there's obviously a market there. There's obviously interest there. We can convince people. What about expanding to human consumption? How close are we to being able to have a cultivated meat be something that you'll find on a restaurant menu or in a shopping basket?
Yeah, for human food, it's already available in the US, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Australia, New Zealand. So it is already approved in those countries, but the availability today is very small, and that's because the challenge, again, on the cost side and on the scale up. I think we'll also approvals. I think the UK will probably be the first country in Europe to approve it, and that will probably take 2 to 3 years from now. Which again, in terms of food technology adoption, is actually pretty quick. It's probably 50 years from the microwave being launched to it actually having mass adoption. These things do take time, and for new products to come in, all of this just takes time. So for us to do it in the next 5 to 10 years is actually good, fast progress in many ways. But yeah, it's really the technical side which is the limitation rather than regulatory at the moment.
And is it something that's in the longer term plan for Meatly to push into human consumption, or are you staying firmly focused on pet food?
Pet food is an amazing market. We've got amazing partners and opportunities in pet food. That being said, all of our processes are fit for human consumption, or we see them as fit for human consumption. We don't have approval yet. But we could look at licensing our technology to human food, I think would be the middle ground rather than try and do it ourselves. And I think that, again, would allow us to amplify the impact of our low-cost, novel processes without needing to raise huge amounts of capital to do it all ourselves.
You've mentioned cost. I mean, the cost reductions that you already talked about in terms of the feed, in terms of actually building the machines in which you ferment all of the cultivated meat. I mean, those reductions are incredible, but there's still an extra price that people are paying and a premium that they're paying for this meat. Are you taking steps to reduce costs further? Are there other places that you can squeeze somewhere in the process?
The cost reduction we've done so far has been fantastic, and we're really proud of the work we've done there. Most of the future cost reduction will come from scale up and economies of scale. The other thing we're focused on now is process efficiency, so just increasing the yield we get out of the process slightly. And the other aspect is on automation. And so just bringing in more automation into the process. Now that we've got a pretty fixed idea of how we run a low cost process, bring in some robotics, bring in some kind of sensor automation, bring more of our equipment online, rather than what is still pretty manual R&D processes at the moment. And that will allow us to bring kind of the overall process efficiency up significantly.
You've got your regulatory approval, you're a leader in the space. Thinking a little bit more broadly than just Meatly then, what are the biggest challenges that this cultivated meat industry is going to face in the next couple of years? Scaling is obviously one, but what are the other challenges that people are going to run into in the industry more broadly?
I think looking externally, the biggest challenges are going to be consumer adoption. So how we communicate this to consumers, as we said, is very critical. And explaining to them the process, I think being transparent and very open is going to be essential in doing that. And so potentially even opening our facilities, having like brewery tours where you can see exactly what's happening, right? Just demystify the entire thing. Probably the first food factory that's ever wanted to do that, but that's a real show of how how strong conviction that we have in our process. And the other is going to be managing the food transition. As I said, I think there are significant challenges in meat production, and we need to be able to support farmers moving to regenerative, sustainable ways of farming, while also promoting these new alternatives, helping people understand what those are. Again, whether that be plant-based, insect-based, fermented, cultivated, this new kind of plethora of products which are hopefully coming to market in the next 2 to 10 years. And so just really managing that process from a marketing perspective, from a political perspective, from a livelihood perspective. And I think we can do that efficiently. I think we can build a more sustainable, healthy, and kinder food system while protecting everyone who currently has a stake in that. And I think that's what we all want to see. We see more and more government strategy documents around food stating that around the world. And so we kind of all know we need to get there. And it's just doing that in the most responsible, fair way. And so I'm really excited about the future of cultivated meat. I'm really excited about the future of our food industry. And I'm really excited about what that means for our health, for the health of other animals, and the health of our planet.
Fantastic. Owen, thanks for joining us today on Beyond Biotech.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.